roll this thing outside and bulldoze it and be done with it forever. After all that damage and all that carnage we found inside the motor, I think we finally got a cheap answer, and we're gonna go over that. For those of you that are just tuning in now and seeing what the heck is going on, let's explain what's going on. So we built this 454 and we had some pretty good problems with it on our first actual test drive. We had some problems where it didn't sound like the valves were closing fast enough, and we just were finding some really weird noises in here and we weren't sure what was going on. Well, basically, to make a long story short, I ended up getting the complete wrong valve springs and the wrong valve seals and all that kind of stuff. I ended up getting these press-on valve seals that press on the valve guides, and they weren't the exact right size, so they came off. And then what happened was all this stuff got all mangled and chewed up. When I put this motor together, and I called Summit Racing, and Summit Racing has treated me really good in the past, and it's not their fault. This is my fault, because I am not a professional engine builder and I didn't know to look out for these particular things. Everything in life is a learning experience, and this is just one of those. When I put this motor together, I thought, man, it is really weird. Look at how easy I could just push on these valves and open them. That's the first thing that I thought wasn't right, because usually these take a lot more force to open than just that. The second thing I thought was weird, so what we had originally was we had our center spring, and then we got this one with the damper in it. I thought it was really weird because even when these were all the way down, you can't see it in here, but this center spring is completely loose, like it just goes up and down. It's not even any tension on it. I thought that was really strange. And I even called Summit and asked him about that, and the one guy I talked to said that that was perfectly normal. I didn't agree with him because that just don't make sense that you have springs just kind of flopping around with not even any tension on them. Makes no sense to me. No sense. So I knew something was wrong. So basically what my problem is, they're a completely weird head compared to a standard 454, and it makes sense because these are out of a motorhome. These valve guides are like a 1 in a million size, so I cannot get the press-on valve seals to fit on these valve guides unless I take the heads off, send them to a machine shop, have them cut them off. We're not doing that right now. That's not an option. We ran into a problem with our installed height on the springs. When I originally ordered the springs, I said I wanted them for a 1987 Mark IV big block 454, and that's what they gave me, and they said you just put them in. They never asked me about my installed height. Now, I know about installed height, and I know about how that stuff works, but usually a lot of times you get on that subject when you're building like a high-performance motor, machining things down, you're getting different valves, and you're getting rockers, and you're getting like all this. This is just a stock rebuild. So I didn't really think nothing of it. I just figured, okay, just a stock replacement spring that would go with this cam that I have. I'm running a Summit 1066 cam, which is 519, 519 on both the intake and the exhaust. So I just figured these just went in, and that was just it. But you could see here with our stock umbrella seals on the valve with this center spring, it won't fit in. Beautiful. So where that comes along is we end up getting these press-on ones that go on. Well, they didn't necessarily press on the way that I thought they were supposed to, so they all came off and got crushed and destroyed. And that's why we're at where we're at. And the third thing is our installed height. For these particular springs that I have, our installed height is supposed to be 1.9 inches. Our factory installed height on this motor that I would have needed was 2.3 inches. That explains why it was running weird at higher RPMs, because the valves weren't closing fast enough. And that explains why I could just push them in super easy with my hand. Makes no sense. We basically have to buy valve springs for this thing. There's a problem though. I don't have money for valve springs because this is a budget build. We're not going to buy valve springs. We can't afford it right now. It's not in the budget. Literally is not in the budget for this car. I am tapped out with this thing. We're at the end of the budget. Like, we literally don't have like more than $100 to spend on this car. That is what it is. When we took this motor apart, we had these things right here. And these things are valve spring rotators, and they sit at the bottom of the valve seat, and the valve spring sits on top of them. They got like a little bearing on it to kind of allow like the valve to rotate or whatever. And so I ended up messing around and I ended up getting my caliper out. These things are exactly 3/10 of an inch that we need to make our 1.9 installed height. So right now our installed height without these is 2.3 and we need a 1.9. These are 3/10 of an inch. That's 3/10 of an inch difference. So there we go. But there's one problem. With these sit in there like that, and then our valve spring sits on top of these like that. But the problem is our center spring isn't going to work because it's just not made for these. Again, we can spend $200 and buy spacers, but I literally don't have the money to do that. It's not an option. This is basically a matter right now of pushing this car outside or driving it. Like, that's the way it is. That's the way it is when you're not a millionaire or a rich daddy's boy or anything like that. You have to make do with what you got. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a big case of you can't do that. We are going to leave these springs out for now. We are going to put these springs only. We have the damper spring. We're going to put these springs on it without the center spring. That is going to allow us to run our factory umbrella style seals because we won't have this spring. We'll have this, we just won't have the center spring. Believe me, I don't want to do this. This is not the right thing to do. But again, this is a matter of driving this car this year or pushing it outside. Times are tight right now. This is what we have to do. We're desperate. We want to get this thing done. I want to have some fun with this year. And ultimately, if it costs me big, so be it. I'll yank this junk out and I'll put a 350 or a 6-cylinder in it. We're calling it a day because I've had enough with this. I'm not pulling these heads off. I'm not sending them to the machine shop to machine the valve guides. This is where we're at. This is the only option, and I spent hours on the phone. This is the only option we have right now. We're basically going to shit in one hand, wish in the other, and see which one fills up first. And I have a feeling I already know what one's going to fill up first. The summer's already over half gone already. I'm getting tired of this thing being in the garage, being a dead horse. So in the last video, I was using this customized tool right here that I just made. And I was bolting it on the rocker stud like this and using it to push the valve spring down, which worked great. But now that we're adding 3/10 of an inch to our installed height, these valve springs are going to push down a lot harder. So we had to get a new tool. Let's check this thing out, see what it's all about. This allows us to change the valve springs without removing the head, which is going to be very, very helpful. So let's plug our air hose back in so we can hold our valve shut. Then we're going to put our rotator down in here, put our valve seal on. This tool is just supposed to thread right on here. Let's see how good this thing works. I hope this tool really works good for us. Let's put our handle on, push our little spring down. See what happens here. See if we can get a spring flying across the shop at Mach 10. No. Now we're hitting our push rod. Looks like we got to take our push rods out. Let's try it again. Beautiful. Look at that. Definitely going to be time consuming to make sure we don't mess anything up doing this. I'm sure we're going to drop stuff. Probably say lots of bad words. This thing's not really pushing these down square like it would be nice, but I don't know. One can only hope. Look at that. I think that's going to work for us, honestly. I sure hope it does. Now when we push our valve spring down, We could barely even push it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna check our installed height right now, which is the distance between the top of the spring seat and the bottom of the spring seat, the spring retainer. I should point, and this should be around 1.9. We are 1.85. Just a hair tighter than our 1.9. Hardly anything, like a half of a tenth of an inch, which is not much. This isn't going to be a motor that's going to be raced down the drag strip and see 10,000 RPMs and all that. So I think we're going to be in pretty darn good shape with what we got going on here. So after about 4 hours of screwing around, we finally got all of these complete. We got all of these valve spring rotators put back in. And we definitely dug out a lot of garbage from down in where the valves were seated in the heads. This is everything we dug out. Of course, these are just the old valve seals that got destroyed. But all that gunk right there, all this broken up rubber and everything. Here's the secondary valve springs we took out like we discussed. Hopefully that doesn't bite me doing that. I think we're gonna be okay though. We're not racing this motor. That's definitely a lot of time doing that one by one, cranking the motor over. I just basically did the firing pattern of the motor and bobbled back and forth between. That way I didn't have to rotate the motor 5,000 more times than I really had to. That definitely saves a lot of time when you're doing stuff like this, is if you go through and you do the firing order in the motor, each cylinder in that order, you'll usually be like, you'll only go around like 2 times. Makes it really simple if you're able to do that. So I'm gonna go ahead, hook the battery up, and I'm just gonna crank this thing over a little bit, just see what happens. I already cranked it over like 3 or 4 times afterwards with the hand ratchet, just to make sure nothing's binding, make sure everything's good, but kind of want to crank it over without the valve covers on. That way if I hear something, it'll make it a lot easier, and I don't have the spark plugs in either. So we're gonna go ahead and replace the oil in this and hope that we got everything out. And we need to change the oil in it anyway because we did go through our break-in process. We took it up the road a few times, so it is ready for an oil change regardless. So I have some 2050 right here we're gonna put in, high zinc break-in oil. We're gonna run this as long as we can. It's definitely a lot easier to put this in before the valve covers go in, but it doesn't matter. Well, we made it to our first startup. We are ready, finally. Man, this thing is burning me out. We got all the valve covers back on. We got everything. We got all the plugs back torqued down. We got all the plug wires back on. We got everything in pretty good shape. We're gonna tune our carburetor a little bit, mess around. I did some messing around with that. We're gonna try to put the timing light on it again. We're gonna try to set a couple things, but first we need to get our initial start up, and hopefully we can even get that far. I would definitely say after a couple little things and timing and all that, this thing here is the real deal this time. I think that was definitely my problem all along. Those valve springs not being installed at the right height, the valve seals and all this stuff. I tell you what, man, it's been a lot of learning process going through this, but I tell you, it's definitely 100% sounds like a different car this time. It was actually running good enough for me to take the time and adjust the float height and the idle screws and all that stuff now and do the timing nice. So I got it timed and all that at this point, because before I couldn't really keep it running. I couldn't really figure out what the heck the problem was, because I had that dead spot, but that dead spot is completely gone now. So it sounds like the valves are definitely doing what they're supposed to be doing at this point. We got a little bit hot because she's in the garage and no air. I should get a bigger fan for this thing, absolutely, because I think I'm gonna definitely want it. I really don't want to take it out for a ride right now, because around here you got people that just disrespect the road and get horse crap all over the road, and it's just super annoying when you get a nice car. So when it rains, we can't take anything nice out. So we're just gonna have to wait for a dry day, and we're gonna take this thing for our first ride. Well, I've definitely had my share of hard times. I've had my share of breakdowns. I've had my share of happiness. I've had my share of anger, this old Chevy. But I gotta say, I'm pretty sure we got all the bugs worked out of it now. I say that lightly because you never have all the bugs worked out of it. But I've put probably about 100 miles on this car so far with no issues. I had to do a lot of little stuff that we'll run through real quick. So we had some major trouble with this thing breaking down. I got towed 3 times with this. The old lady had to come and flat tow me home 3 times with this Chevy. I mean, that's usually stuff that happens with a Ford. Basically what it ended up being is a mixture of the fuel pump, fuel filters, and most important of all, it was the fuel tank. So we'll climb under here. You'll see right up there, I end up putting a fuel filter, so that's where the fuel tank comes down, kind of out and around. What ended up happening, and I did clean the fuel tank too. I got that big 30-gallon fuel cell thing in here. Why don't we just show you, it'll be easier. So I have this big 30-gallon fuel tank in here, and I bought that 10 plus years ago, and it's just been sitting outside. I had it plugged, but you know, sitting outside doesn't help anything. And it did have a bunch of crap in it, but I put like 2 quarts of gas in it, shook it around, emptied it out. It could have been cleaned better. But what ended up happening was I didn't clean it out enough because I was stingy, because I didn't want to use a ton of gas, because I mean gas is worth gold now. And what ended up happening was pieces of rust and just other kind of debris ended up getting in the check valves in the fuel pump and not allowing the fuel pump to do its job. It was basically just doing nothing because the check valves were plugged up with garbage. And this fuel filter here kept plugging up on me. It was just a complete nightmare. What ended up happening was the last time I broke down, because it was weird. It would quit running, and then you wouldn't get anywheres. I'd tow it home, and then let it sit, and then I'd start it up. It would run totally fine. And then I would take it out again, real local, like a mile up the road or so, and then it would quit again, no matter what I did. I even tried to change carburetors on the side of the road. I tried to... And it was getting fuel, but it wasn't building up any pressure. It was putting a little fuel out. So that was a result of the check valves in the fuel pump. And I just could not figure out what it was. I mean, it always had sparks, so it's not like it was the coil getting hot or anything like that. It's a really weird thing. What ended up happening is the last time it quit to the point where I couldn't get it started again. So I ended up pulling this off right here, and I got a little valve you can see. I open up that valve and I get nothing. So then I put a blowgun in that and blew it back that way. And I had a pan underneath, and it just puked out all kinds of crap, like big like rust particles that you'd see on this frame right here. Then I ended up putting another fuel filter right there so it doesn't plug the fuel pump up. I've cleaned that fuel filter probably 10 times already because that fuel filter just kept getting plugged up, and now it's to the point where it hasn't had anything in it. So that was basically the root of the problem of why this Chevy was turning into a complete Ford. Was basically, again, it was my fault. Just like the valve springs. I did all the valve spring stuff, doing my checks right, because I didn't know what I didn't know. Now that I have those rotators back on there to get me my correct installed height for these valve springs, I put at least 100 miles on this car, and I haven't had any problems with it. I messed with the timing and stuff, got her dialed right in. We went for a ride, the thing runs great. I really hope it doesn't come around to bite me, not putting them inner valve springs on. But like I said, it's just kind of one of those things. That's what we gotta do to get by. Over the winter when I'm not driving this thing, I'll look into it more and see what other options I have. Maybe we'll even get aluminum heads for it. That'd be pretty cool. Screw them peanut port junks that are on it now. But you know what? It works fine. It really runs good. So if I can get away with this, I really just want to keep driving it.
End of transmission.